Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this 43rd Legislative District Virtual Town Hall. Today, you'll hear from Senator Jamie Pedersen, Representative Nicole Macri, and Representative Frank Chopp. Our goal today is to provide you an update on this year's legislative session and to respond to your questions and concerns about state government and issues before the legislature. Some of today's questions were submitted in advance through the survey we sent out through e-newsletters and on Facebook. And throughout the hour, please share your questions in the comment section wherever you're watching, whether it's Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter. We're going to try to get through as many topics and as many questions as we can today. So let's get things started with some introductions. Senator Pedersen, can you kick us off?
Sure. Thanks very much, Curtis. My name is Jamie Pedersen. I'm the state senator for the 43rd District, and am happy to be with you all here today, although I do have to say I really hoped that we would be back in person this year. Let's hope that next year we'll be able to do the town hall in person. I wanted to highlight just a couple of things that have happened so far in the state Senate, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. One is that I've been working on a bill with Seattle Subway for the last few months that will allow the city of Seattle and any other sub area within the Sound Transit area to come up with an additional package of improvements for the light rail and transit system, and then the money to pay for it, put that in front of the voters, and then start building those enhancements, because I think we can all agree that the light rail is great, but needs to be built out faster, and that it has tremendous promise for us, but that's going to be realized only if it can be built out so that it has even better service than it already has. The other piece of legislation that I wanted to highlight is something that I've been working on for many years, and last year was happy to be able to get out of the Senate Law and Justice Committee, and then this year was especially pleased to have come out of the Senate with a strong 28-21 vote, and that's a ban on high-capacity magazines. We know that whether a state allows the sale of high-capacity magazines is one of the strongest factors that correlates with the prevalence of mass shootings in that state. And so I'm really happy that we were able to make that step, and am keeping my fingers crossed that my colleagues over in the House are going to be able to get that one across the finish line this year. So look forward to the questions. I guess I just finally want to say that it is a huge privilege to serve with both Representative Macri and Representative Chopp. It still feels a little weird to say Representative Chopp, but they are fantastic advocates for our district and for all of the folks who live here. So with that, I will turn it over to them. And I think, Nicole, probably you're going to have to go first because Frank always likes to go last.
Thanks, Jamie. And it's great to be here. And I'm really sorry that I actually can't see the audience. It makes it really a lot less, I think, enjoyable to have this connection with folks, but really glad that we are able to at least see the questions and know that many people are watching today. And I too am hopeful that next time we can be in person. I thought we would be there by now, but I think we all have learned to live with a lot of uncertainty and changing dynamics over the last couple of years. So I'm Nicole Macri, and I have served the 43rd Legislative District since 2017. And I, in the last couple of years, have been serving as a vice chair of the House Appropriations Committee, and want to highlight a few different both policies we've been working on in the House, as well as talk a little bit about the budget. We'll start to see the Senate and House operating budgets coming out this week, and some action turning to our operating budgets. On the policy front, we have had a very lively first half of session this year. I'll say it's come with a lot of big successes and definitely some disappointments for me in some policy areas that I thought we would make more progress on, but we will continue to push forward on. On the climate action front, I was really pleased to see us get the Clean Buildings Bill 1770 out of the House and over to the Senate, as well as House Bill 1099, which is looking at climate-related issues as cities and counties implement the Growth Management Act. Having done a lot of work myself in the area of housing, including building a lot of housing for people who are low income and homeless, we know that energy efficiency in the built environment is really important. So I'm glad to see us making progress on that front. I'm really glad the Senate passed over the high capacity magazines bill to the House, and look forward to that. We passed over to the Senate a couple of gun safety bills that I am really glad we got over. One is banning ghost guns that Representative Liz Berry from just over in the 36 did tremendous work on. And another what is on banning guns in certain locations, including places like school board meetings. And as we've seen, just more and more discord in the public dialogue, particularly around the pandemic, these safety measures are really, really important. As usual, these bills were highly contentious on the floor, with Republicans putting up dozens of amendments against them, but they are so important. So I'm glad that we're making progress on that front. I'm looking at my notes. Oh, a couple other ones I do want to talk about. We in the House passed a bill on social emotional learning, and really making sure that students in our public schools can have access to nurses and counselors and psychologists. Alicia Rule, who is a member from up in Whatcom County and who specializes in children's mental health herself, brought forward that bill. And we also passed a bill to enhance and set a new strategic plan on children's behavioral health. So all of that, I think, is vitally important as we continue to hear more and more about the struggles that kids, students and families continue to navigate throughout the pandemic. And then finally, I want to talk a little bit about bills that we've been working on to support working people in our state. In particular, House Bill 1868, which is a bill to bring more protections to healthcare workers, particularly those working in hospital settings. That staffing bill is really important. We're hearing about the challenges the pandemic's presenting in terms of workplace conditions, and it is, I think, time for us to ensure some safeguards for our hospital workers. They've done tremendous work throughout the pandemic, and the state needs to be there for them. And similarly, you may have heard the House had a very long, maybe longest in history, debate on protecting workers who have musculoskeletal injuries. This is from doing repetitive work. So this is particularly an important bill for people who are in usually lower paid or more dangerous physical labor positions. And so I was really glad we stuck it out on that bill and passed it. There is definitely an intersection between increase in musculoskeletal injuries at work and our growing opioid crisis over the last decade. And so for me, that was an issue not just of worker protection, but of public health as well. There's many more bills. As I said, I've been working a lot on the operating budget, and I am glad to take questions on that. I'll say that the operating budget that we'll see from both the Senate and the House, I am very optimistic about, in part because it's going to be, these budgets are going to be built on top of what was a historic biennial budget that we passed and the governor signed last year, making investments in the resiliency of people across Washington. So we really focused on the basics in the last budget, and we're going to build upon that. So food, shelter, health, direct cash in the form of rent assistance, utility assistance, immigrant relief, small business relief, climate action. So we took great steps last year, and we'll continue to do that as we see the supplemental budgets come out. And I look forward to the conversation coming up. And I'll turn over to you, Frank.
Thanks, Nicole. Appreciate this opportunity very much. Welcome to everybody who's tuning in. It is a great working relationship. We have the three of us working on all sorts of issues, including everything that Nicole said, plus what Jamie said. We're in agreement on those issues for sure. In the interest of time, I'd just like to focus in on a particular issue in terms of housing and homelessness. Nicole and I in particular are working very hard on that. And as she said, there will be a historic level of funding in the capital budget for affordable housing through the State Housing Trust Fund, plus a new program, a new dynamic to address the issue of homelessness. And I'm supposed to speak up more. That's sort of funny. Okay. Can you hear me better now? I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today. The issue I've been focusing on, in particular, in addition to the things that Nicole and Jamie said, was trying to figure out a new dynamic in terms of dealing with homelessness. When you have a situation statewide where the people of the state believe strongly that we should have, as a top priority for this legislative session, housing and homelessness, I went to work with Nicole and many others, a lot of stakeholders, to come up with a new dynamic, which I've called Apple Health and Home. The key is to link up healthcare and housing, particularly for those who are on the streets and are facing chronic homelessness. So I've asked the question, well, why are people chronically homeless? And the issue is pretty clear. Over 70% are there because of their medical condition, their mental illness or substance use disorder or severe physical disability. So we have put together a proposal, Apple Health and Home, House Bill 1866, that I got out of the House 96-2. It wasn't quite unanimous, but damn close. And what it does is it sets up a process for people who are on Medicaid, the Apple Health program. If they are homeless due to their medical condition, then they should have a home. Now, I believe, as many of you probably are tuning in, believe that housing is a fundamental human need and a fundamental human right. This is a way to go forward on this thing, to focus in the people that need the help the most. Those are suffering and dying on the street. And so we're very pleased with this progress. There will be money in the capital budget as well as the operating budget to carry that out. In addition to those issues in terms of homelessness, I've also been very pleased to see the progress we've made in terms of workforce housing and other related community services. So 2 projects you might want to see in the district here if you get out at all. Up at Roosevelt, I played a leading role in getting the housing above the light rail station, 270 units of housing, plus the early learning center run by Alcentra de Raza. It's nearly done, so I urge you to come to the open house and they have it. And another one is at Madison and Boylston on First Hill. It's a transfer development housing going up 17-story for 370 units of housing, including 120 units reserved for homeless seniors. So I think these are the kinds of tangible efforts we can do that affect not only people statewide, but help people in our own district. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, everybody. And a reminder to folks watching at home, this is a live virtual town hall with your 43rd Legislative District representatives and senators. So please ask us questions in the comments, and we're going to try to get to as many of them as we can today. And let's start out with a question from Charles, who sent us his question through the survey that we sent out to constituents. Charles asks, what are you doing to modify Washington's long-term care law? Charles says that one of the reasons he thinks it's a bad deal for Washingtonians is because of things like not being able to use it in another state. So can you tell us about this program and what changes you're going to make to it this year?
I'm glad to take that one. Frank and I actually have been working together quite closely on the reforms to the Washington Cares program, which, I do want to say the underlying program will be an incredible benefit for Washingtonians in the sense that it will first and foremost, really, I think, bring a tremendous opportunity for seniors to continue to stay in their homes for as long as possible. We know that most folks need long-term care. Most of us have not saved money to provide for our own long-term care. And many of us are in situations where we must take care of our family members, often parents, as they get to aging. I was just saying, most of us have this idea that people live a long life and they die suddenly. And unfortunately, for most people, that is not the case, and they will need some kind of care. So the WACARES program is a forward-looking program in establishing a way for Washingtonians to get the support that they need and really keep people out of bankruptcy and keep them in their own homes for as long as possible. It was and continues to be in need of some reforms. And so the governor has already signed into law reforms that the House and Senate worked together on, including ensuring that those folks who are later in their careers, who will be paying in and would not have reached the original vesting period, which was a 10-year period, can get prorated benefits for the dollars that they put into the program. And then we added some exemptions to the program for folks who are incredibly unlikely to be able to draw down benefits, people who are going to only be working in Washington for a very short amount of time, like non-immigrant visa holders, people who currently live outside of Washington but work in Washington, like residents of Oregon or Idaho, and for military spouses who relocate to Washington for a short period of time as their spouse is serving the United States military. But Charles brings up a good point that there's more work to do on that, and we will see language in our budgets to direct the Washington Cares program to look into ways we can make benefits more affordable. We actually, Frank and I worked on this issue quite a bit over the last year, and what we learned in working with the state agencies and with stakeholders is that it's pretty complicated to create a portability of the benefit, but the legislature is directing the executive branch to figure it out, because we do think that is essential. And the point is true. Some people will feel they can't retire in Washington. Others will choose to move closer to family in their later years. And so it is an issue. that we think needs to be worked on. Now, the initial benefits won't start to roll out on the plan for several years. And so while this is an issue that needs to be addressed, we think it's worthwhile to take the time and put the work in to do it well.
I could add, if you don't mind, the fact that we listened to people from around the state who had legitimate concerns about Washington Cares program. We listened and we took several actions, including delaying the program so we could make sure we implement it in a proper way, and also do several key reforms, as Nicole referred to. But we kept in mind that this fundamental approach is really a way of expanding Social Security, which is a very popular program. But when it got started, it had some things to improve and implement over the years. But fundamentally, we believe in Social Security for all who need it.
All right, let's stick with another question from the survey. Actually, a few questions came in on the survey about police reform and the status of legislation around that, especially House Bill 2037. Camille, Vince, and Diane all had questions about that. So can you tell us what's the status of that bill and any possible modifications we could see to the police accountability reform legislation that passed last year?
Yeah, so I'm happy to take the lead on this set of questions. So obviously in the wake of the killing of George Floyd and the murder of a whole series of Black and brown people, we spent a lot of time thinking about, and then a lot of our effort in the 2021 session, passing a series of police reform bills, depending on how you count, somewhere between 12 and 15 of those bills. And the vast majority of that legislation, including the bill about reform of the Criminal Justice Training Commission that I prime sponsored, have gone into effect without any problems at all, really no complaints from stakeholders, from the police. There are two bills that we passed last year, one about police tactics and one about use of force, that have been the focus of complaints by the police and sustained campaign to try to reverse some of the reforms. Now, some of the things that they have raised are issues that we didn't intend. I think, it's could be fair or it could be unfair to say that there are defects in the original law. For example, we never intended to say that the police could not use force to help put someone into involuntary treatment. So the House has already passed, and there is a bill right now in the Senate Law and Justice Committee that I feel quite confident is going to make it to the governor's desk, that says that in a set of specific areas around behavioral health and child welfare, community caretaking, that police can use reasonable force. And so we will make those corrections. There's another question that came up around the tactics bill and its general prohibition on the use of military equipment, about the use of beanbag rounds, less lethal alternatives that police might be able to use. And we also did not intend to prohibit the police from using less lethal alternatives. So the House has already passed again, and there is a bill before the Senate Law and Justice Committee that I feel quite confident will make it to the governor's desk. There are some other issues that I feel quite confident we're not going to reverse our reforms on. So, for example, there were proposals both in the House and the Senate to change the law back and allow the police to use vehicular pursuits and what we sometimes call hot pursuits or police car chases, which are really dangerous for the police. They're dangerous for the suspects, and they're dangerous for innocent bystanders. They're just not necessary in almost all cases. So I don't think that it's likely that any of those changes will get to the governor's desk. Then in between those ends of the spectrum, there's a question about how the police can stop people and use force when there are what are called investigative detentions or Terry stops. And the legislature did not last year intend to prohibit the use of Terry stops, but some questions have come up about that. So there were bills in both the House and the Senate that would clarify that. And House Bill 2037 is probably the vehicle that, if we make some changes in that area, would be the vehicle for that. Now, that bill passed out of the House with language that I think the Coalition for Police Accountability, those are the families and their allies, the ACLU and others, were not comfortable with. And so we are in the process of revising that bill in the Senate Law and Justice Committee. And I don't know the answer. I think the bill will come out of the committee with language that I think we can be happy with, and that the ACLU and the coalition will be comfortable with. If we can't get there, then I don't think the bill is going to come up for a vote. So that's, in a nutshell, the status of 2037. And I really appreciate the deep engagement, continued engagement on these issues from our constituents. I've heard from many of you about this, and appreciate the support and encouragement.
Yeah, I'll just add to that that the engagement has been incredibly helpful from my perspective as well. And this is an area I think that all three of us have been taking very seriously. Frank and I both voted against 2037, although there are some really helpful clarifying things in that bill, particularly around defining physical force, which has been a challenge over the last year of not having a statutory definition of physical force. But Jamie's honed in on the issue of concern that families of people who have been killed by police raised with me. I had many emotional conversations with impacted families about this, and in just also in my work in behavioral health with highly vulnerable people, many of whom I've known personally to have very bad interactions with police. I felt the bill just went too far. So I'm glad to hear that Senate Law and Justice is doing some continued work in that area. And I'll say 1735, which is the bill to clarify officers' role in assisting in behavioral health crises, is one that I worked really closely with the sponsors on, and I think will be incredibly helpful. I've heard from many people in the district about incidents that have come up here in Seattle where people have been in behavioral health crisis. And the police accountability bills that we passed last year have been cited as reasons for officers not intervening in ways that they had been doing in the past in ways that were helpful. So I think some of the clarifications in the law will be helpful, and we'll see what happens with 2037.
All right, thank you. Let's go to a question from Facebook, and I'll pitch another reminder to everybody. This is a live virtual town hall with your 43rd district legislators. So please send us questions in the comment section, whether you're watching on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter, and we're going to take as many as we can. So let's go to our first question from Facebook. This comes from Joanna. Joanna is asking, are we going to see a transportation revenue package? I know that has been introduced already, and it has passed, at least one of the pieces of legislation attached to it has passed the Senate already. So perhaps we can hear from the lawmakers about what's in it for the state of Washington, what's in it for Seattle and the 43rd district, and just your thoughts about what's going to get it across the finish line this year.
I could start since we started. The Senate has already passed the transportation package. We passed it last Tuesday. At least the revenue part of it. We're expecting this coming Friday to pass the projects and the details that go about the spending side of the package. But it is going to be the greenest transportation package in the history of the state, with huge investments in active transportation, bike and pedestrian infrastructure, and in transit, including free transit for all youth in the state, which is a huge step forward for us. It also, a little bit closer to home in terms of projects, is going to include money to balance the books on the 520 project and make sure that the neighborhoods in our district, Roanoke and Montlake in particular, get all of the mitigation that they've been promised through the course of the project, and that we make those bike connections so that folks can use their bicycles to get around. So I am really excited about the transportation package. There are still things that we need to be working on. Oh, and there's also going to be money for continued progress on the idea of building a lid over I-5 in downtown Seattle, which I think would be a huge benefit for the state generally, and in particular for the 43rd. So I'm excited to see that happen. The passage of the Climate Commitment Act last year really opened up the dollars, the flexible dollars that don't have to be spent on road expansion like the gas tax, so that we can make that package happen this year.
I could add my 2 cents worth. Yes, I absolutely do believe that the transportation will pass both houses. There will be some adjustments made along the way. A big priority for us is to make sure that we invest in preservation and maintenance of our current structure rather than build new highway capacity. That's an incredibly important thing. In years past, I've been part of the groups that have sued the state of Washington over the expansion of Interstate 90 and the Arboretum, what was called the R.H. Thompson Expressway that was going to wipe out the Arboretum. So we have had some successes in the past, but this one, more than any transportation package in the past, has really focused in on preservation and maintenance and the transit investments, which is incredibly important, as Jamie just described. And so I think it's going in the right direction. We'll see the details, but yes, there will be a transportation package.
And I'll just add finally that the three of us collaborated very successfully when the package was getting finalized to make sure that there's not going to be an expansion by building a second Montlake Bastille Bridge, which would have really harmed the neighborhood and is completely an unnecessary expansion of road capacity in an area that's now well served by transit.
Hear, hear.
All right, Margie is watching on YouTube and she has a question on the same topic. And this one might be a question more about how you're going to interact with your federal partners related to the transportation package. But Margie is concerned that an investment in high-speed rail in the transportation package could be a bit harmful for the climate, and perhaps more investment in Amtrak would be a better use of dollars and better for the environment. Can you speak about that?
Well, I could start maybe by saying that for many months, I've brought together constituents in the 43rd District. I call them my climate crew, and involving quite a number of people in the district focusing on climate, but part of that obviously is the transportation package. They have raised to me the concern about the ultra high speed rail in terms of whether it's worth the investment and how long it would take, and look what happened in California, that kind of thing. And they'd much prefer money being put into Amtrak investments. So I'm going to be working with our transportation chair to try to push that ethic because we need to improve what we already have. But there's a lot of folks who believe in that ultra high speed. It's just a question of whether it's feasible and how costly it'll be compared to all the other things we need to fund.
All right, looks like we've started a bit of a dialogue on the social media feeds about this issue. So let's take one more question from Stan, who's watching on YouTube, before we switch gears to a different topic. Stan asks, can you say a bit more about the fact that there will not be a second Montlake Bridge?
Yeah, so many years ago, I think probably, Frank, 2009, WashDOT started saying that because we weren't building the Pacific interchange that was going to take cars from 520 over to the north side of the Montlake Cut, they started including money for a second Bastille Bridge over the Montlake Cut, just to the east of the existing Bastille Bridge. And we've been in many meetings and have been fighting that idea for the last 12 or 13 years. The city council has at various points passed resolutions opposing it, and we've heard loud and clear from the neighbors who live in Montlake that they have no interest in a widening of the road and an addition of the bridge. And probably most importantly, we've heard from traffic engineers that there's zero benefit in adding a bridge, because the congestion through there is caused by the fact that the bridge has to go up, not by a lack of lanes. So when we found out this year that the 520 project was roughly $600 million out of balance and needing additional resources, I started right away saying, well, how much of that is the second Bascule Bridge that's still on the books? And it turns out that more than $200 million of that shortfall is because of that second Bascule Bridge. So I said, well, I can help you solve 1/3 of the problem right there. And so Nicole and Frank and I have been working on that. And although that was in an early draft of the House package, Nicole and Frank were able to advocate well, and we did from the Senate side as well. And as a result, that is taken out of the package and pushed out. So I think we are pretty confident that that is not going to be funded.
All right, let's go to housing now. We've received quite a few questions from constituents about the role that housing and density have in confronting the housing crisis. We heard from Joe, Judy, and IJ expressing concerns about preserving neighborhood character and livability. We've received questions about the zoning bills that were introduced this session. And specifically, Karina is asking what's next for advocating for rezoning in cities like Seattle, and how can constituents get involved about learning about the legislation, and how can they take action to help you?
I'm glad to kick off that one and have some conversation. And so we worked quite a bit on a zoning reform bill, House Bill 1782, that would have enacted broad low-level density across many cities and towns in Washington state, and having slightly different requirements for cities over 10,000 and cities over 20,000, and then larger cities like Seattle. And the concept of a broad, low-level increase in density by replacing in what have traditionally been single-family zones the ability to build duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, fourplexes, or cottages, for example, is a way, if you do it broadly, can increase the kind of housing options that we know that middle income people need. So that doesn't let government off the hook from really continuing to make significant investments like the ones that Frank talked about to ensure that the lowest income people who are living homeless, have access to housing that is affordable. But what we've seen over the last decade or so is that more and more and more middle-income people are being pushed out of communities, further and further away from employment centers, further away from higher education centers like the University of Washington, because the cost of housing has just gotten exorbitantly high. And people have asked me, well, we've seen upzoning happen in Seattle and the cost of housing has continued to increase. What we've done in Seattle is pretty targeted up zones, often going from a lower level to really to multifamily, so apartment building zones, and that can certainly cause displacement and gentrification. But the other thing we've seen is that cities have unevenly worked on zoning reform, and so as the housing crisis has become less of an urban issue, definitely more of a regional issue in the Puget Sound, and now even a statewide issue, as I'm hearing more and more people saying that not only are they leaving Seattle, but they're leaving Western Washington to move to Eastern Washington. And we're seeing the housing costs go up incredibly in Eastern Washington. In Spokane, rents went up 23% in the last year. This idea of a statewide low-level upzone took hold. Now, there are many considerations to be brought forth in such a conversation, and I think I heard some talked about in terms of tree canopy and neighborhood character. And I think part of what we need to continue to do as we have these zoning conversations is to figure out, like, what is the baseline and where is the right spot for local communities to have some say at the kind of micro level about what works in their communities. But I will say, from my perspective, leaving zoning policy solely and exclusively to local communities has been part of the failure that we have had as a state in ensuring enough access to housing that is affordable for more and more people in our state.
All right, thank you. And I'm noticing that we're having more and more people join us as our time continues here in this live virtual town hall with Senator Jamie Pedersen, Representative Nicole Macri, and Representative Frank Chopp. So to everyone who has joined us in the last few minutes, please send us your questions in the comment section wherever you're watching, and we're going to try to take as many as we can. And now let's turn to public safety. We talked a little bit about police accountability. Now let's turn to public safety. Nathan and Ellen both sent us questions in the survey, I believe. I know Ellen sent us the question in the survey. I think Nathan did too. They're both concerned about crime and retail theft. Can you speak to what the legislature is doing to address these issues?
Did you?
Go ahead, Jamie.
I'll just say from the budget perspective, like one thing that we are doing is the more we can do to ensure the sort of ecosystem of small businesses are vibrant and we're bringing people back into the business districts of our communities, the better off I think we all will be. We've seen issues around low level crimes. We're hearing more and more anecdotally about that. And clearly an intersection with the absence of people and the absence of interaction in the brick and mortar location. So we made significant investments last year to support small businesses, and I think we'll see that again in this year's budget proposals as well.
If I could add to that, both Nicole and I know Jamie supports this as well, is that we need to provide a hell of a lot more housing for folks who are homeless. They usually bear the brunt of being blamed for this kind of issue, and it's a serious issue, but the answer has to be with providing decent housing for people who are on the street, whether they're in the tents or in the gutter or in the parks or whatever, and that's why we pushed a number of proposals, and successfully so, in terms of investments. The best way to invest in public safety is to invest in our people through things like housing and healthcare and education. So we will continue that, and also still want to work in partnership with other levels of government to address the broader issue.
And I'll just say finally that while we have been watching these trends, we've not just sat on our hands. The Senate passed Senate Bill 5781, which has to do with organized retail theft. Situations where there's sort of a coordinated attempt for multiple people to overwhelm the security at retail stores. And so we passed that 46-3 last week, and that is currently in the House Public Safety Committee.
All right, we heard a little bit from you in your introductory remarks about climate and the environment, but let's hone in on that a little bit more with this question from Dean, who he says, global warming is an existential threat to our children and grandchildren. What actions can we expect to see from our legislators to avert the climate catastrophe?
Well, maybe I could start here, is that we did a lot over the last few years. Once we got a progressive majority in the state Senate, by the way, thanks, Jamie, for doing all that work to join the House progressive majority. And one of the key things we did was to pass a bill in 2019, which was 100% clean electricity, where the electricity being generated is all clean and non-carbon. In addition, Nicole's been a great leader on electric cars, and I've been her co-sponsor on many of the things that she's proposed in order to transition our transportation system away from, gas guzzling cars and SUVs into electric vehicles. And we're making progress on that. I think that's the key part in the future, because over 50% of the climate emissions evidently are coming out the tailpipes. And so we have to address that head on through a combination of efforts.
And then Nicole had mentioned the House bill about Energy Code 1770. The Senate also passed Bill 5722, which is another clean buildings bill. After vehicle emissions, the emissions from our built environment, from buildings, are the next biggest contributor in our state to carbon pollution. And so the 5722 will dramatically increase the number of buildings that are subject to those kinds of controls and help us to transition in coordination with the bill that Frank mentioned about clean electricity toward a world in which our buildings are not polluters, but can actually be carbon capturers. And then I'll just say, finally, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but last year's passage of the Climate Commitment Act, which is now in the process of rulemaking and being implemented, is going to put us on a path for a pretty dramatic and nation-leading reduction in carbon emissions. And I'm hopeful that we can continue to be an example for other states and other countries about how to do this properly.
I just want to add a couple of lower profile things. So I have done a lot of work, as Frank said, on the zero emission vehicle front. It's just one piece of the puzzle, as you're hearing, but an important one. And in the last year, I've been working really closely with the governor's staff on implementing an executive order to move all of our state vehicles to 100% zero emission by 2035. So that's not starting to purchase zero emission vehicles, but by 2035 to see all of our state owned vehicles as zero emission. So we have resources in the budget to aid in that transition. And similarly, setting out a goal that's even more ambitious than California's to really ensure that new vehicles registered in the state of Washington are all zero emission is something I've been working on for a long time. It's an element that's included in the transportation package, not only setting out the target date, but requiring state agencies to do a scoping plan to ensure that we can move the market and ensure consumers are well positioned for that transition in 2030. And so those are a few lower profile things, but I think essential to get us there.
Okay, thank you. Well, since we heard from Representative Macri about electric vehicles, let's stick on that same topic with a question from Sue that we got in the survey. Sue says she's all for renewable energy and electric vehicles, but is there a plan for all the trash that will be generated from switching from gas-powered cars to electric vehicles? And also, what can be done to help low-income folks afford them?
I can take the second part of that question where I'm a little bit more knowledgeable. I'll say that in terms of the recycling of batteries, including batteries in electric cars, we did have a lot of robust policy consideration in the House around that, and I think more work will be done in that area. Representative Harris Talley from the 37th District did tremendous work in bringing together industry and environmentalists around issues around the battery transition. But we have been having a lot of conversations about how not only can we bring new vehicles, but how we can switch out sort of gas engines to electric engines. This is, way above my knowledge level, but apparently there is work happening in our community colleges, programs around how we do those kinds of transitions. The governor's budget included a pretty significant electric vehicle rebate program that would move us away from greenhouse gas ICE vehicles and internal combustion engine vehicles more rapidly. But I think we'll see variation on the governor's proposal coming both from the House and the Senate. The governor's proposal really focused a lot on higher income families and higher MSRP vehicles. At least in the House, we've been really talking about a more equitable approach and looking at the neighborhoods and communities that are most impacted by gasoline emissions, and which are often lower income areas of the state, and how do we really help folks who otherwise would not have the resource or be inclined to transition to electric vehicles when they make that choice to purchase their next vehicle, for it to be electric. And so we'll see significant resource, I think, in the operating budgets around supporting middle and lower income families and making those choices for zero emission vehicles.
To poor and unsafe staffing conditions. So now that the bill's in the Senate, maybe we can hear a little bit about the plan to get it out of there and to the governor's desk.
And Curtis, we couldn't hear the beginning of the question. I think you might have been muted.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I'll just start all over. So we heard from the three of you in your introductory remarks about the healthcare safe staffing bill. We also got a question from Whitney about it. Whitney says she is a nurse herself and moved out of the state because of the conditions she faced. So can you speak about the bill's prospects in the Senate and whether it may get to the governor's desk this year?
So I am a co-sponsor of Senate Bill 5751, which is the Senate companion bill to 1868. And I do think that given the crisis that we have in healthcare with the ongoing pandemic, the burnout among healthcare workers and nurses in particular, and the information that we have about the likelihood that there could be a significant wave of retirements or people leaving healthcare professions, we need to take action to try to help address the most significant concerns that we've heard about their work conditions, which are forced overtime and inadequate staffing. Those are really complex problems, but I think that the bill HB 1868 is a really strong attempt to try to address the concerns that we've heard from those frontline workers, and that we have an obligation to support it. Now, the bill right now is in the Senate Health and Long-Term Care Committee, and it has to go through the Senate Ways and Means Committee, and then the Senate Rules Committee, and then to the Senate floor. I don't serve on health and long-term care, so I'm not sure what will happen there. I do serve on Ways and Means, and will do my best to advocate for it in that spot. But that is going to be one of the tough issues that's in front of the Senate here in these last 3 weeks of the session.
Well, building on that, Nicole and I definitely voted for 1868. I mean, under the basic theme of give nurses a break, for God's sake. I mean, it was really simple to us, particularly in light of the pandemic. In addition, myself and Nicole have spent a lot of time in terms of improving the workforce, that is, increasing the workforce in healthcare and in behavioral health in particular. One of the things we did a few years ago, which has made a difference, believe it or not, is that we created a community health college for Seattle Central College and put it in the Pacific Tower building, the north end of Beacon Hill there. And that's a great effort. They're graduating nurses, dental technicians, and a whole bunch of others in the allied healthcare field. So we have to increase the supply, but we also got to treat the nurses with a lot more respect and help in terms of doing their jobs.
Yep, I'll say, yeah, both and. We can continue to encourage, to increase the capacity of teaching nurses, graduating nurses, but we're hearing more and more they don't want to go to these settings where the work conditions are completely untenable. So 1868, I think, is a key piece of the strategy. And as Frank said, in addition to the things we've already done, we did engage all of the four-year institutions and the community colleges to give us information about the number of slots for nursing students that they can increase if they had additional state resource to create that capacity for new cohorts of students to come through. One of the biggest challenges in creating more slots for nursing students has been that nursing educators it's a very difficult position to recruit for, because often people can just earn more money if they're working out in the healthcare field rather than in the higher ed field. So we've also been looking at how we do some dedicated loan repayment specifically for nurse educators to attract them and sort of widen the pipeline of education for healthcare folks.
Yeah, along those lines, we passed in 2019 the Workforce Education Investment Act, which provides funding for those very things. We literally paid the salaries of nursing faculty at the Seattle Central and other community colleges so they'd stay there in the classroom teaching the next generation of nurses. In addition, Nicole mentioned that about student loans for nurses. We're also passing a bill to provide public financing of student loans so that it's not subject to all the high interest rates that the private sector has done over the many years. And we also had other investments out of the workforce education investment, including free college and university tuition for all low-income students, a big proportion of which go into healthcare.
All right. Thank you, everybody. And we are just about 5 minutes away from the end of our hour here. Before we wrap up, I see Joe is watching on YouTube and he really wants us to get to his question before we end. So let's go ahead and do that. He's asking us about House Bill 1329. This is a bill related to encouraging public access for open meetings and public meetings. It passed the House and it's now in the Senate. Senator Pedersen, can you tell us about what you know about that bill getting through the Senate?
So that's a bill that was introduced last year. It passed last year out of the Senate State Government and Elections Committee, and then just got caught in the normal rush of House bills at the end of session and didn't have enough time. This year, let me back up and just explain to folks that I think part of the reason for the question is my role this year is I'm the Senate Majority Floor Leader, so I am the one who sets the order of consideration for bills on the Senate floor. I don't just do that in a vacuum. What happens is that our chairs give us their highest priorities out of committee, and so we try as hard as we can to get to all of the bills that are high priorities for the chairs of the different committees. Then we also have this thing called the majority rule in the Senate. So we have to have 25 votes to bring something to the floor. It doesn't seem like that's likely to be a problem on this bill. So as long as there's not some flag that Senator Hunt, as chair of the committee, has about the bill, I think we will do our best to get through it. And in the first half of session, we reached all of our priorities and a number of sort of medium priority bills. So I will do my best to see if we can get that one through.
Well, Senator, you answered that so quickly that we're going to squeeze in one more. Representative Chopp and Representative Macri, do you have any thoughts about the prospect of the high capacity magazines for guns bill getting to the House floor and to the governor's desk? And then we'll turn to closing remarks.
Well, we definitely support that bill. We appreciate Jamie's incredible work to get it out of the Senate. And so we will work together in the House to advance it and hopefully pass the floor in the House. Then the governor, I'm sure, will sign it very quickly in terms of that's one of his priorities over the time. So we'll do what we can here to get it out of the House as well.
All right. Thank you, everyone. We're now just a couple minutes from the end of our time here. So let's go to some closing remarks. Can you tell us any last thoughts you want to share with your constituents before we end for today?
I'm glad to start off. I just, as usual, I'm totally impressed and grateful for the detailed questions from the constituents of the 43rd Legislative District. I always say this is sort of, a high performing group of constituents in the sense that folks really, really understand the complexities of these policy issues and have been great advisors to us as we sort of suss through the complexities of these issues. So continue, please, to reach out to us as we continue to work on issues this session. We are, as you heard, dealing with a lot of complex issue around climate action, around housing policy, around police accountability, and these are issues, as always when we're working on these policy issues at the state level, that have huge impacts to folks in our district, as well as people across the state. I do think, as I mentioned, started off today, we'll see movement on all three budgets, supplemental budgets, the capital budget, the transportation budget, including the transportation package that we mentioned, and the operating budget. So your feedback as those packages move through the process will be very important. We only have about 2.5 weeks left until the end of session, so it will be fast and furious, so to speak, as we continue to work through the policy that the other chamber passed over, and as we also continue on the budgets. These supplemental budgets are of a magnitude that I think have never been seen before in a second year of a biennium. And so the work is relatively intense, but the needs are very large as we continue to navigate our way through the pandemic.
Frank, you want to go next?
Oh, sure. I do want to put in a word for somebody who made a critical difference in order for us to have additional funds to do a lot of good things, and that's Stacey Abrams in Georgia. There were 2 Democratic senators who got elected there to get to 50, which then triggered a variety of things like the American Rescue Plan and other investments at the federal level. That may not happen again. I'm pretty sure it won't, based on the politics right now. So we have to do great things now, but also prepare for the future. And there's still great unmet needs in this society in Washington State. When I hear the stories about need for special education funding in our public schools, or the folks who've got developmental disabilities, they are way underfunded in terms of what we need to do. And so we need to link the great need that we have in parts of our Washington society with a revenue source that can then lead us to fund those things. And so we'll be working not only this session, but during the interim to prepare our next session to do additional things that are high priorities for the people's needs of this state. But we got to do it in a way that makes our system, not just our tax system, but our entire society, more fair and equitable for everyone. So I thank everybody for being here today, and look forward to further comments from you, as I'm sure you'll contact our offices.
And I guess I'm just going to close with maybe a slightly different take. I think one of the things that I appreciate about serving in the Senate, and it's been great to be mostly back in person on the floor this year, is the opportunity for us to model civil discourse and collaboration in trying to solve these problems. You know, the problems that we have with homelessness, or with behavioral health issues, or with special education, or with transportation, are not Democratic problems, and they're not Republican problems. And all sorts of people, even with very different political beliefs, want to solve the problems for their communities. And the legislature is really a wonderful and unique place for people to come together and try to work collaboratively on finding solutions to those problems. So it is my hope that in our work in committees, in our work on the floor, and in our interactions with all of you, we can continue to model civil discourse and show sort of a different way from the kind of sniping and very partisan work that we sometimes see at other levels of government. The state government is in better position in that way.
And that wraps up our time today, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us.